Isabella Thornton woke up every morning in a bedroom bigger than most people's entire homes. The walls were painted in soft cream colors that cost more per gallon than many families spent on groceries in a month. Her bed was so large that she sometimes felt lost in it, surrounded by silk sheets that felt cold against her skin no matter what the temperature was outside. At 22, she had everything a person could want. At least that's what everyone told her. The closet in her room was the size of a small apartment, filled with designer clothes she barely wore. Most days she just grabbed whatever was closest and called it good. What was the point of dressing up when you had nowhere special to go? The Thornton family lived on the top 3 floors of a building in Manhattan that they owned entirely. Below them were offices for their tech company, the one that had made them rich enough to buy small countries if they wanted to. Isabella's father had built the business from nothing, or so the story went. Now he spent his days in meetings she didn't understand, talking about numbers that seemed to have no connection to real life. Her mother was always busy too, running from one charity event to another. She planned galas and fundraisers, wearing different expensive dresses each time and smiling for cameras. Sometimes Isabella wondered if her mother even remembered what it felt like to wear the same outfit twice. Isabella had tried getting involved in the business when she turned 18. She sat in conference rooms where people spoke in abbreviations and showed her charts that meant nothing to her. Everyone nodded when her father spoke, and they nodded when she spoke too, but she could tell they were just being polite. She wasn't stupid. She could see that her opinions didn't really matter to anyone. The house always felt empty, even though there were people everywhere. There was the doorman who opened doors she could open herself. There was the chef who cooked meals she barely tasted. There were people who cleaned rooms she didn't even use, and people who answered phones that rarely rang with calls for her. Most of the staff had worked there for years. They were polite and professional, always saying, "Yes, Miss Isabella," and "Right away, Miss Isabella." But they never really talked to her. She was the boss's daughter, which meant she lived in a different world from them, even though they all lived in the same building. Sometimes Isabella stood at her bedroom window and watched people walk on the streets below. From up there, they looked like tiny dots moving around with purpose. They seemed to know where they were going and why. She envied them. Even if their lives were harder, at least they seemed to have a reason to get up in the morning. Her days followed the same pattern. Wake up in the empty bedroom, eat breakfast alone in the dining room while reading news on her phone about people she'd never met. Try to find something to do that felt meaningful. Usually she failed. The only place in the house that felt different was the music room. Her parents had bought a beautiful black piano years ago, thinking Isabella might want to learn. She had taken lessons for a while, but her teacher was formal and boring, more interested in proper finger position than actually making music. After a few months, she quit, and the piano just sat there collecting dust. Isabella liked to sit in that room sometimes because it was quiet in a different way than the rest of the house. The rest of the house felt dead quiet, like a museum after closing time. But the music room felt peaceful, like it was waiting for something beautiful to happen. On the floors below, Maria Santos was starting her day too, but her morning looked nothing like Isabella's. Maria had been the head housekeeper for the Thornton family for 15 years. She knew every corner of their home better than they did. She knew which faucet in the guest bathroom dripped if you didn't turn it tight enough. She knew that Mrs. Thornton liked her coffee exactly 3 minutes after it finished brewing. Not sooner, not later. Maria was proud of her work. She took care of the Thornton house like it was her own, which in some ways it was. She spent more time there than in her own small apartment in Queens. The apartment was nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms that she shared with her son when he wasn't away at school. But it was theirs, paid for with honest work and careful saving. Every morning, Maria took the subway from Queens to Manhattan. The ride gave her time to think and plan her day. She carried a small notebook where she wrote down everything that needed to be done. Clean the guest rooms on the 2nd floor. Make sure the kitchen was ready for the chef. Check that all the flowers in the house were fresh. Maria had raised her son David by herself. His father had left when David was just 2 years old, and Maria had never heard from him again. She didn't mind. She was strong enough to take care of her family on her own. David was 24 now, old enough to take care of himself, but Maria still worried about him the way mothers always do. David was smart, smarter than anyone Maria had ever known. He could fix anything that broke and figure out problems that stumped everyone else. But he was also gentle in a way that reminded Maria of her own father. He loved music more than anything else in the world, and when he played piano, it was like magic. The problem was that loving music didn't pay the bills. David worked part-time jobs to help support them both, and Maria knew he was tired all the time. She wished she could give him everything he deserved, but she was doing her best with what she had. Maria had met Isabella when the girl was just 7 years old. Back then, Isabella had been curious about everything and everyone. She would follow Maria around the house, asking questions about how things worked and where Maria lived and what her own house looked like. Mrs. Thornton had eventually told Isabella to stop bothering the staff, and slowly the curious little girl had turned into the quiet young woman who barely spoke to anyone. Maria felt sorry for Isabella sometimes. The girl had everything money could buy, but she seemed lonely. Maria had learned not to get too personal with the family she worked for, but sometimes she wondered what Isabella thought about all day in that big empty house. Neither Isabella nor Maria knew that their lives were about to change in a way that neither of them could have imagined. Sometimes the most important moments start with the smallest things, like a young man sitting at a piano on a quiet Thursday afternoon. Thursday afternoon came with the same heavy silence that filled the Thornton house every day. Isabella sat in the living room, staring at her phone without really seeing it. She had scrolled through the same social media posts 3 times, looking at pictures of people she barely knew doing things that seemed more interesting than anything in her own life. Her parents were both out. Her father was at another business meeting, and her mother was planning some charity event for next month. Isabella didn't even bother asking what it was for anymore. It would be the same as all the others. Rich people in expensive clothes, eating tiny food and writing checks to feel better about themselves. The house felt especially quiet today. Most of the regular staff had finished their work early. The chef had left after preparing meals that Isabella probably wouldn't eat. The cleaning crew had come and gone, leaving everything spotless and smelling like expensive cleaning products. Even Maria had finished her work and gone home to Queens. Isabella got up from the couch and wandered around the house, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. She passed room after room that served no real purpose. There was a library full of books no one read, a gym with equipment that barely got used, and a formal dining room where the family ate maybe twice a month. She found herself walking toward the music room without really planning to go there. It was one of the few places in the house where she could think clearly. The room had large windows that looked out over the city, and the afternoon light always made everything look softer somehow. But as she got closer to the room, she heard something that made her stop in her tracks. Music was coming from inside the music room. Not just any music, but the most beautiful piano playing she had ever heard. The melody was complex and flowing, moving from gentle and sweet to powerful and emotional in ways that made her chest feel tight. Isabella crept closer to the doorway and peered inside. Someone was sitting at her family's piano, their back turned to the door. It was a young man she didn't recognize. He wasn't wearing the usual uniform that the maintenance workers wore. Instead, he had on a simple t-shirt and jeans, and his dark hair was slightly messy, like he had been running his hands through it. She watched him play, completely amazed by what she was seeing. His hands moved across the keys like they belonged there. Every note seemed perfect, and the way he swayed slightly with the music made it clear that this wasn't just technical skill. This was someone who truly understood music in a way that Isabella had never seen before. The piece he was playing seemed to tell a story without words. It started soft and questioning, like someone looking for something they had lost. Then it built into something more confident and strong, but there was still a sadness underneath that made Isabella's eyes water without her understanding why. For several minutes, she just stood there listening. She forgot about her empty day and her lonely life. She forgot about her parents and their busy schedules. She forgot about everything except the music that was filling the room and somehow filling parts of her that had been empty for so long. When the music finally stopped, Isabella realized she had been holding her breath. The young man sat quietly for a moment, his hands resting on the keys. Then he started to turn around and Isabella panicked. She didn't want to seem like she had been spying on him. "That was incredible," she said quickly, stepping into the room before she could lose her nerve. The young man jumped slightly and turned around completely. He had kind eyes and a face that looked tired but gentle. When he saw Isabella, his expression became worried, like he had been caught doing something wrong. "I'm sorry," he said, starting to get up from the piano bench. "I didn't think anyone was home. I can leave right away." "No, wait," Isabella said, walking further into the room. "Please don't leave. I loved what you were playing." "What was that piece?" The young man looked confused for a moment. "You mean the song?" "I wrote it myself. It's nothing famous or anything." Isabella felt her eyes widen. "You wrote that? That whole thing?" He nodded, still looking like he wasn't sure if he was in trouble. "I've been working on it for a few months. I probably shouldn't have been playing it on your piano. I just saw it sitting here and it's such a beautiful instrument." "You work here?" Isabella asked, though she was pretty sure she had never seen him before. "Not exactly," he said. "My mother does." "Maria Santos? She's been working for your family for a long time. I was just visiting her and I heard the piano from the hallway. I'm sorry if I shouldn't have touched it." Isabella's mind was racing. This was Maria's son. She had heard Maria mention him over the years, but always in passing. Maria was private about her personal life, which Isabella had always respected. But she had never imagined that Maria's son was this talented. "Don't apologize," Isabella said. "That was the most beautiful music I've ever heard in this house. Actually, it might be the most beautiful music I've ever heard anywhere." The young man smiled for the first time since she had walked into the room. "Thank you. That means a lot. I'm Isabella," she said, realizing they hadn't been properly introduced. "David," he replied. "Your mother probably mentioned me." "She has, but she never mentioned that you play piano like that. Are you a professional musician?" David's smile faded a little. "Not really. I mean, I play sometimes at small venues, but it's more of a hobby. I have other jobs that pay the bills." Isabella felt a surge of something she couldn't quite name. It might have been excitement or curiosity or maybe just the first real interest she had felt in anything for months. "Would you play something else?" she asked, "please. Just for fun?" David looked at her for a long moment as if he was trying to figure out if she was being serious. Then his smile came back, brighter this time. "What would you like to hear?" "Anything," Isabella said, settling into one of the chairs near the piano. "Surprise me." David turned back to the piano and placed his hands on the keys. "This one is called City Dreams," he said. "I wrote it about people who come to New York looking for something they can't find anywhere else." As soon as he started playing, Isabella knew that her boring Thursday afternoon had just become the best day she'd had in years. The music filled the room again, but this time it felt different because she wasn't just listening by accident. She was part of it somehow, the audience that David was playing for. The melody was different from the first piece, more hopeful and energetic, but just as complex and beautiful. Isabella found herself leaning forward in her chair, not wanting to miss a single note. She watched David's face as he played, seeing how the music changed his whole expression from worried and tired to peaceful and alive. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Isabella felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Isabella couldn't stop thinking about David's music. For the rest of that Thursday and all day Friday, the melodies he had played kept running through her head. She found herself humming parts of City Dreams while she brushed her teeth and walking to the music room, hoping he might be there again. But David didn't come back on Friday. The piano sat silent and the music room felt empty in a way it never had before. Isabella realized that in just one afternoon, David had somehow made the house feel alive, and without him, everything went back to being cold and quiet. She wanted to ask Maria about her son, but she wasn't sure how to bring it up. Isabella had always kept a polite distance from the staff, just like her parents had taught her. It felt strange to suddenly be curious about someone's personal life when she had never shown interest before. Saturday morning came with gray clouds and rain tapping against the windows. Isabella sat in her bedroom with her laptop, pretending to read emails about charity events she didn't care about. But her mind kept wandering back to David and his music. She wondered where he worked, what other songs he had written, and why someone so talented was working random jobs instead of performing for thousands of people. Without really planning to, Isabella found herself opening a new browser tab and typing David Santos Musician New York into the search bar. She wasn't sure what she expected to find. Maybe a small website or some local newspaper articles about community concerts. What she found instead made her sit up straight in her The first search result was a YouTube video titled D Sonata, Live at Brooklyn. Underground, a Midnight Reflections. The thumbnail showed a young man at a piano, but the lighting was dim and she couldn't see his face clearly. Isabella clicked on the video, her heart beating faster for reasons she couldn't explain. As soon as the music started, she knew. It was David, the same gentle, powerful style she had heard in her music room. But this performance was different. There was an audience cheering and clapping, and the energy in the small venue was electric. David commanded the stage like he had been born to be there. Isabella stared at the view count under the video. 2 million views. 2 million people had watched David play piano, and she had stumbled across him by pure chance in her own house. She scrolled down to read the comments, and her amazement only grew. People from all over the world had written about how his music had touched them. Someone from Germany said his songs helped her through a difficult divorce. A college student from California wrote that he played David's music while studying because it helped him concentrate and feel calm at the same time. "Who is this guy?" someone had commented. "His music tells stories better than most movies." Isabella clicked on the channel name and found dozens more videos. David performing in small venues across New York City. David playing original compositions on street corners. David collaborating with other musicians she had never heard of, but who seemed to have huge followings of their own. Every video had hundreds of thousands of views, some reaching into the millions. The comments were always the same. People begging to know where they could hear more of his music, asking when he would release an album, sharing stories about how his songs had changed their lives. Isabella kept clicking and scrolling, falling deeper into this world she never knew existed. She found articles in small music magazines calling David the voice of a new generation and a revolutionary artist who refuses to play by industry rules. One article said he performed under the name D Sonata to keep his privacy, rarely giving interviews and never revealing much about his personal life. There was a whole underground music scene in New York that Isabella had never known about. Small venues in Brooklyn and Queens where people gathered to hear artists who weren't on the radio or television, but were creating music that felt real and honest. David was apparently one of the stars of this scene, even though he had never signed with a major record label. Isabella found a video from just 3 months ago where David played at a venue called the Heart of the City. The place looked tiny, maybe room for 50 people, but every seat was filled. People sat on the floor and stood against the walls, all completely silent as David played a song called Letters to Tomorrow. As she watched him perform, Isabella realized she was seeing a completely different person than the nervous young man who had apologized for touching her piano. On stage, David was confident and powerful. He spoke to the audience between songs, making jokes and telling stories that made people laugh. He seemed comfortable in his own skin in a way that Isabella envied, but what amazed her most was the music itself. Every song was different, but they all had the same emotional honesty that had struck her so deeply in the music room. David wrote songs about ordinary people living ordinary lives, but he made those lives seem beautiful and meaningful. He wrote about working late shifts and missing family dinners, about dreaming big dreams in small apartments, about finding love in unexpected places. Isabella spent hours going through video after video, reading article after article. She discovered that David had been offered recording contracts by several major labels, but he had turned them all down. In one rare interview, he said he wasn't ready to give up control of his music just yet. He wanted to make sure that anything he released truly represented who he was as an artist. "Success isn't about how many people know your name," David had said in the interview. "It's about connecting with people through your art. If I can help one person feel less alone in the world, then I've succeeded." Isabella felt tears in her eyes as she read those words. She thought about all the people in her life who knew her name only because of her family's money. She thought about all the conversations she had where people said exactly what they thought she wanted to hear. David's music was the opposite of all that. It was honest and real in a way that nothing in her life had been for years. She kept searching and found David's social media accounts, though he didn't post very often. When he did, it was usually just pictures of different pianos he had found in various locations around the city, or short videos of him working on new compositions. He never showed his face clearly, and he never talked about his personal life. But Isabella noticed something in the background of one photo that made her heart skip. It was a picture of sheet music on a piano bench, and behind it she could see part of a subway map and what looked like a small apartment kitchen. The lighting was dim, but she could just make out a woman in the background who looked exactly like Maria. Isabella leaned back in her chair, trying to process everything she had discovered. The quiet young man who had apologized for playing her piano was apparently one of New York's most beloved underground musicians. People all over the world knew his music, but he still worked part-time jobs and lived in a tiny apartment in Queens to help support his mother. He had everything Isabella thought she wanted. People loved his work for what it was, not because of who his family was or how much money he had. He had created something beautiful and meaningful with his own hands and his own talent, but he was also struggling in ways that Isabella had never had to worry about. For the first time in her life, Isabella realized that everything she had always believed about success and happiness might be completely wrong. Isabella spent the entire weekend thinking about what she had discovered. By Monday morning, she had made up her mind. She was going to help David become the star he deserved to be. With her family's connections and money, she could solve all his problems. It seemed so simple. She waited until Tuesday afternoon when she knew Maria would be working in the house. Isabella had never really talked to Maria beyond polite greetings, but now she had a reason. She found Maria organizing the linen closet on the second floor, carefully folding towels that already looked perfect. "Maria," Isabella said, trying to sound casual, "do you have a minute to talk?" Maria looked surprised but nodded. "Of course, Miss Isabella. Is everything okay?"
"I met your son last week, David. He played piano in our music room." Isabella watched Maria's face carefully.
She expected Maria to look pleased that her son had impressed the boss's daughter, but instead Maria looked worried. "I hope he wasn't bothering you," Maria said quickly. "I told him he could visit sometimes, but I made it clear he shouldn't disturb the family." "He wasn't bothering me at all," Isabella said. "He's incredibly talented. I had no idea you had such a gifted son." Maria's expression softened a little, the way any mother's would when someone praised her child. "David has always loved music. Even as a little boy, he would sit at toy keyboards and pretend to write songs." "Well, he's not pretending anymore," Isabella said. "I looked him up online. He's famous, Maria. People all over the world know his music." Now Maria looked confused. "Famous? David works part-time jobs to help pay our bills. He plays at small places sometimes, but that's just for fun." Isabella realized that Maria had no idea about her son's success. David had kept his growing fame secret from his own mother. That made Isabella even more determined to help him. "He's more successful than you know," Isabella said, "and I want to help him become even more successful. My father knows people in the music industry. We could get David a recording contract with a major label. We could help him quit those part-time jobs and focus on his music." But instead of looking excited, Maria looked uncomfortable. "Miss Isabella, that's very kind of you, but David is proud. He likes to make his own way in life. But he doesn't have to struggle," Isabella said. "We can help him. We should help him." Maria was quiet for a moment, still folding the same towel over and over. "I appreciate your kindness, but please don't say anything to David about this." "Let me talk to him first," Isabella agreed, but she was already making plans. She called her father that evening and told him about David's talent. Her father listened politely, but Isabella could tell he wasn't really interested. "That's nice, sweetheart," he said, "but I don't get involved in the entertainment business. It's too unpredictable." Isabella called her mother next. Her mother was more encouraging, but for the wrong reasons. "How wonderful," her mother said. "We could sponsor him. Imagine how good that would look for our family's image. A working-class musician that we discovered and supported. The media would love it." Isabella felt sick to her stomach. That wasn't what she wanted at all. She didn't want to use David for good publicity. She genuinely wanted to help him because she believed in his talent and because she cared about him as a person. But her mother had already started making plans. "We could throw a party and invite all the right people. Music executives, journalists, society photographers. We could launch his career properly." "Mom, I don't think David would want that kind of attention," Isabella said. "Nonsense," her mother replied. "Everyone wants to be successful. We just need to show him the right way to do it." Isabella tried to explain that David already was successful in his own way, but her mother wasn't listening. By the time they hung up, her mother was already talking about venue bookings and invitation lists. Isabella felt like everything was spinning out of control, but she thought David would understand once she explained her intentions. She waited for him to visit Maria again, and when she finally saw him in the house the following week, she rushed to the music room where he was playing. "David," she said excitedly, "I have amazing news. I found all your music online. You're incredible, and I want to help you take your career to the next level." David stopped playing and turned around. "What do you mean?" Isabella launched into her ideas. Record labels her family knew, venues they could book for him, publicity campaigns they could fund. She talked quickly, excited about all the possibilities. But as she spoke, David's expression grew more and more uncomfortable. When she finally stopped talking, he was quiet for a long moment. "Isabella," he said slowly, "I appreciate that you want to help, but I'm not looking for a sponsor." "It's not sponsoring," Isabella said. "It's friendship. Friends help each other." "Friends help each other," David agreed. "But this feels like charity. You're talking about solving problems I never said I had." Isabella felt confused. "But you could quit your part-time jobs. You could focus entirely on music. Isn't that what you want?" "What I want," David said, standing up from the piano bench, "is to build my career with my own hands. Every fan I have, every venue that books me, every song that connects with people, I earned all of that. It means something because I did it myself." "But you're struggling," Isabella said. "You don't have to struggle." David's jaw tightened. "You think I'm struggling? Because I work part-time jobs? Because I don't live in a penthouse?" Isabella realized she had said something wrong, but she wasn't sure what. "I just meant that things could be easier for you." "Easier isn't always better," David said. "And honestly, Isabella, you don't know anything about my life. You saw me play piano twice, and now you think you understand everything about what I need." Isabella felt like she had been slapped. She had only wanted to help. "I'm sorry. I thought you would want the opportunities my family could provide." "The opportunities your family could provide," David repeated. "Do you hear yourself? You're not offering friendship. You're offering to be my patron, like I'm some kind of pet project." Before Isabella could respond, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Isabella's mother appeared in the doorway, smiling brightly. "You must be David," she said. "Isabella has told us so much about your talent." "I'm Mrs. Thornton." David stood up politely. "Nice to meet you, ma'am." "I've been thinking about your career," Mrs. Thornton continued. "We could really help you reach the right people. In fact, I've already made some calls." Isabella watched David's face change. The uncomfortable expression became something harder, almost angry. "Made calls?" he asked. "Just to a few friends in the music industry," Mrs. Thornton said. "I told them about this wonderful young man we've discovered. They're very interested in meeting you." David looked at Isabella, and she could see the hurt in his eyes. "You told her to do this?" "No," Isabella said quickly. I mentioned you to my parents, but I didn't ask her to call anyone." But it was too late. David was already walking toward the door. "I need to go." "Wait," Isabella called after him.
"David, please."
"Let me explain." He turned back to her. "There's nothing to explain. You see a poor musician who needs rescuing. I see someone who worked hard to build something real. We're looking at completely different things." After David left, Isabella's mother shook her head. "How ungrateful. We offer to help him and he walks away. Some people don't appreciate what they're given." But Isabella was beginning to understand that the problem wasn't David's lack of gratitude. The problem was that she had been so eager to fix his life that she had never bothered to ask if his life needed fixing. She had assumed that her world was better than his, when maybe the truth was exactly the opposite. After David walked away from her in the music room, Isabella didn't see him for 2 weeks. Every time she heard footsteps in the house, she hoped it might be him coming to visit Maria, but he never appeared. The piano sat silent again, and Isabella felt like she had broken something precious without meaning to. Maria continued working in the house as if nothing had happened, but Isabella could tell something was different. Maria was polite as always, but there was a distance between them now that hadn't been there before. Isabella wanted to apologize, but she wasn't sure how to explain what had gone wrong when she still didn't fully understand it herself. She spent those 2 weeks thinking about everything David had said to her. At first she felt hurt and confused. She had only wanted to help him. But slowly, as she replayed their conversation over and over, she began to see things from his perspective. Isabella realized that she had never once asked David what he actually wanted. She had looked at his life and decided it needed fixing, based on her own ideas of what success should look like. She had assumed that everyone wanted to live the way she lived, in luxury and comfort, without considering that David might have chosen his path for reasons that mattered to him. The more she thought about it, the more she understood that David's part-time jobs weren't something he needed to escape from. They were part of how he stayed connected to the real world that inspired his music. His small apartment in Queens wasn't a problem to solve. It was his home, the place where he wrote songs that touched millions of people. Isabella had offered him everything except the one thing that actually mattered. She had never offered to simply be his friend and appreciate his music for what it was. On a Friday night, 3 weeks after their fight, Isabella made a decision. She had been looking at David's social media and seen that he was performing at a small venue in Brooklyn called The Underground. She had never been to Brooklyn by herself, and she had certainly never been to the kind of place where David performed. But that night, she took a taxi across the bridge and found herself standing outside a narrow building with a simple sign that said, The Underground, in small letters. There was no red carpet or photographers, no doorman in an expensive suit, just a regular door, and the sound of music drifting out onto the street. Isabella paid the small cover charge and walked down a narrow staircase into a basement room that was nothing like any venue she had ever seen. The ceiling was low, the walls were painted black, and there were maybe 40 people sitting at small tables or standing near the back. But the moment she walked in, she could feel something her family's fancy charity galas never had: energy, excitement, people who were genuinely happy to be there. David was on stage, sitting at an old upright piano that had seen better days. He was wearing the same simple clothes she had seen him in at her house, and he looked completely at home. When he saw Isabella walk in, his fingers stuttered on the keys for just a moment, but he kept playing. Isabella found a spot near the back wall and listened. David was in the middle of a song she had never heard before, something beautiful and sad about missing someone who was far away. The people in the room were completely silent, hanging on every note. When the song ended, they erupted in applause that felt real and earned. "Thank you," David said into the microphone. "This next one is about second chances." Isabella felt her cheeks burn. She wondered if he was talking about her, but as the music started, she realized it didn't matter. This wasn't about her at all. This was about David sharing his art with people who understood it and loved it for what it was. She stayed for the entire performance, listening to songs that made her laugh and cry and think about her own life in ways she never had before. She watched the audience, seeing how David's music affected them. These weren't wealthy people who could solve problems by writing checks. These were working people, students, artists, and dreamers who found something in David's music that helped them feel less alone. When the show ended, Isabella waited until most of the crowd had left before approaching the stage. David was packing up his sheet music, and he looked up when she got close. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said. His voice wasn't angry, but it wasn't exactly friendly either. "I wanted to hear you play," Isabella said. "Really hear you, I mean. Not just accidentally stumble into your music." David nodded, but didn't say anything else. "I owe you an apology," Isabella continued. "I was wrong about everything. I thought I was helping, but I was really just trying to make you into something that would make me feel better about myself." David stopped packing and looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I was lonely and empty, and when I heard your music, it filled something inside me that had been missing. But instead of just appreciating that gift, I tried to take control of it. I tried to make you into my project instead of just being grateful that you shared your art with me." Isabella took a deep breath. "You don't need my help. You don't need to be rescued. You've built something beautiful here, and I was too blind to see it." For the first time since their fight, David smiled. "It took you a while to figure that out." "I'm a slow learner," Isabella admitted, "but I'm trying to do better." David finished packing his music and looked around the empty venue. "You know, this place is where I feel most like myself. Not because it's fancy or impressive, but because the people here care about the music. They're not listening because they're supposed to, or because someone told them it was good. They're listening because it means something to them." "It means something to me too," Isabella said quietly. "Your music, I mean." It was the first real thing I'd experienced in years. David studied her face for a moment. "Do you want to grab some coffee? There's a place down the street that stays open late." Isabella felt a flutter of hope. "I'd like that." They walked to the coffee shop together, and for the first time they had a real conversation. Not Isabella trying to fix David's problems, and not David being polite to the boss's daughter. Just two people talking about music and dreams and the strange ways life brings people together. Isabella learned that David had been writing songs since he was 12. She learned that he worked his part-time jobs not because he had to, but because he wanted to stay connected to ordinary people and ordinary experiences. She learned that he had been offered major record deals but turned them down because he wasn't ready to give up the intimate connection he had with his current audience. In return, Isabella told David about her loneliness, her struggles to find meaning in her privileged life, and how his music had made her feel awake for the first time in years. Over the following months, Isabella became a regular at David's performances. She brought friends from her social circle, people who had never heard underground music before but fell in love with David's honest, emotional songs. Word spread naturally through New York's cultural community, and David's audiences grew larger and more diverse. Isabella never tried to manage David's career or solve his problems. Instead, she simply became his friend and his most enthusiastic supporter. When music industry executives started approaching David on their own, drawn by his growing reputation, Isabella stayed in the background, cheering him on but never trying to take credit. Maria's position in the Thornton household became more secure than ever. Isabella's parents, seeing how their daughter had changed for the better, began to understand the value of treating their employees with genuine respect rather than polite distance. 6 months after their fight in the music room, David called Isabella with news. He had finally decided to sign with a record label, but only after negotiating a contract that let him maintain creative control and continue performing at small venues. "I want you to be there," David said, "at my first big concert. Lincoln Center booked me for next month." Isabella felt tears in her eyes. "I wouldn't miss it for anything." On the night of the concert, Isabella sat in the audience with her parents and Maria, watching David perform his beautiful, honest music for a crowd of 2,000 people. He played some of his old favorites and debuted several new songs, including one he had written about unlikely friendships. As the final notes faded and the audience rose to their feet in applause, Isabella realized that she had finally learned the difference between helping someone and truly supporting them. David didn't need her money or her connections. He had needed her friendship, her respect, and her belief in his talent. And in learning how to be a real friend to David, Isabella had discovered something she hadn't known she was looking for. She had found her purpose.